Okay, things. I think we are live. Okay. Welcome to the 97th edition of AirHacks TV, and good evening. We have lots of questions, so I started the stream a little bit later because I got last minute questions, and I wanted to read them first. So hello to the chat. So the chat is already active, which is great. And now go to the first question. And the first question is from Dario Urena. And Dario already attended the AirHacks at Munich Airport. So thank you for attending, Dario. And he asked me, my question is, which language framework would you recommend as a fine way to start creating an API that supports role-based what? I think role-based REST, right? And I would say these days, I mean, because you are asking JWT, Django, or Quarkus. This is why I'm thinking. So what do you like to build, right? So I would say I'm working now with JAX-RS and it's fine. So you can build a JAX-RS API in minutes and it's done, right? So you can, now, if you pick, for instance, MicroProfile, you can build the API once and then run it on Helidon, Micronaut, Quarkus. So, and Micronaut also supports JAX-RS. Then you can use more traditional application servers, but if you start, I think you can stick with the 3, but you can use then OpenLiberty, Payara, Glassfish, something interesting like Piranha Cloud. So we will talk about this soon. Piranha Cloud or Cumulus EE. So there are lots of choices. So I would start actually with JAX-RS. What's role-based means maybe it's security. So and Java security works fine, especially the Jakarta E8 security, and together with JSON Web Token is perfect. Now, what would be the advantage of Java comparing to Django, for instance? So I would say, Java is a compiled language and will execute faster than Django or Node. Especially if you're running this in a Lambda, for instance, you will save money. And if you're a Java developer, pick Java. If you don't like Java and you like Python, then choose Django, right? You cannot compare Django to Jakarta or to Python. So I would say, I don't know when you attended several years ago, but I think I showed you some JAX-RS code. So it is exactly the same because it's standard. It doesn't, change a lot. And if you just take your knowledge from back then, apply it to a modern runtime like Quarkus, Helidon, Micronaut, then you are good to go. This would be my advice. So thank you for attending and have fun with Angular. So I would say Java, your backend will feel leaner than the front end. This is my suspicion. Now, Mr. Amar Cher, I think, from Algeria, Mr. D. Empile or Dempile. I wanted to use a mapper like Mapstruct and Dozer in my project. Then I found your post. And what I wrote then is that I think this is the recent post that Dozer is deprecated. I wrote several page note found. But yeah, this was I can Adam bean Dozer. This is a recent post. Yeah, but this is the old one. Exactly. So you found this post, and I wrote a recent post. The problem with Dozer, the Dozer is end of life. So you have two problems now. Dozer, exactly. If you take a look on this, and we'll have switch from here to GitHub somehow. That's Adam bean Dozer. Maybe this. Yeah. This is the more recent post. Object mapping observation and the deprecated Dozer. So the problem is, this is the old post. And the next problem is in Dozer, they say the project is no more active. So you are completely dependent on the framework. and now it's deprecated. So you will have to migrate to something else. So what I tend to do is I do the opposite. So I don't use any mappers in my project, and I expose whatever. So currently we even have public fields. Who cares, right? And then in one point of time, your classes get more not heavy, more they have more. They are more rich. So this is rich. There's anemic, domain model and rich domain model. So this is what I want to express with heavy. They have more logic, and if the classes get logic, then you can encapsulate the fields. Of course, you get compiler errors, but such compiler errors are easy to fix. And I suspect you are no more in project with 200 developers. If you are a small team, this is not a problem at all. Of course, if you're building an aircraft or whatever, then you should probably choose a different approach. But I'm assuming you are working in server-side enterprise projects. So my advice is don't map at all. If you have to map, what can you do? Just use Java records, for instance. What you can do, a class, for instance, can return a Java record. This is the best DTO ever. And Java records, you can even serialize with JSON-B. What you can also do, you can use JSON-P objects as DTOs. We are also doing this in current projects. Or you can have, Java classes with public fields. Why not, right? This is so. What I will advise you, Mr. Dempile, I would advise you just start without such a framework and think about what you would like to expose. And by the way, what I wrote 8 years or 9 years ago is if such a mapper works perfectly, you're doing something wrong, because imagine this: you have no entities, and there is nothing to do. For you just, will pick a Dozer. What happens then is that the mapper just calls a getter here and setter here. This is one-to-one mapping. And if both objects are identical, the question is why you have them at all, right? Because I think you would like, to call all the getters here and load the entire data over to the other object and hope that one day, if you change, the data transfer object, then the entity could be intact. If you think about this, it will never happen, because if you change, the entity, the Dozer will invoke getter here, but there is no setter there, right? So you will always have to keep both objects in sync, and then the question is why you need these objects. So exactly. So I would say start without Dozer or mapstruct and think about why you need such mappers at all. Okay, Mr. Pablo Ruiz from Barcelona. So we have Algeria, Madrid, right? Okay, so and now from Barcelona. In a REST architecture application with a web frontend, the question is, should we use JSON web token authentication as a session data? What you probably mean as session data is whether you should use, they are called, I think, claims, additional key value pairs in the JSON web token, right? So this is the question. And if the token is stolen, then someone use your token. Yeah, but we have SSL hopefully, and this is exactly what we say. Okay, we cannot use access keys in AWS because if they are stolen, someone else is you. This is true, right? So the JSON web token should not. This is if someone steals your MFA device or password, then it's over, right? So stealing a JSON web token should not be possible. So you should use SSL, and the JSON web token is passed, as a header, and it should be not accessible to the outside because of encryption. So this is the first thing. And revoke the token. If I remove access to the user until the token expires, they will have access. Yeah, but the token can be, half an hour. Exactly what a session back then, HTTP JSession ID. I don't know what they remember back then with servlets. You could also have, session. I think the default was half an hour, and in some applications it was increased to 8 hours. And by the way, if you use tokens, is very similar, right? So usually this is like if you're working with let's say AWS console is also the default enroll is 1 hour, I would say, and sometimes 12 hours. It depends what you are doing, which token it is, but this is the default. So I would just keep the default short. And usually, if you're using, for instance, Quarkus or IDC, there is some, dance between the access tokens and session tokens, the JSON Web tokens. So you could use, choose to use the I think they're called access tokens. I think this is just the ID. Without, they are resolved. There is an endpoint where you can resolve with user data, and with something like Keycloak, you can even invalidate the token. So this also works. And the alternative possibility of Redis, what you are referring to, Redis is just like a hash map in memory, which is replicated, which can be replicated. And Redis is a popular solution to store session data. This is true. But if we have, this is what Whitefly did, right, with Infinispan in the last 15 years, I would say. So this is, if we are in Java, let's say, it really depends where you are, yeah? If you are on AWS, there is no Redis. You will probably, pick Elasticache. This is the name of the product, and Redis is working behind the scenes for you. So why you may be now referring to Redis, because you can, click and you have Redis in the cloud. It is even clustered, right? So this is maybe why you're referring to Redis. But if I don't have the cloud, I wouldn't create, install Redis and patch Redis. I would rather try now to use a built-in solution. And if you're using Quarkus, the first thing I would think about would be the Infinispan. In the case of, let's say, Payara, I would take a look at Hazelcast, for instance. They are great grid solutions, and you can store whatever you like there. So, okay. Now, again, so you're from Barcelona. Barcelona never sleeps. 7 days ago, I have to create a platform with many microservices on premise. And now is the question, ideally, they would be separate from each other in your Docker image, correct? No, not always. So I wouldn't do this first. In fact, in one of my current projects, we had several microservices on Whitefly, actually, in own Docker images. And we are migrating now to the clouds. And I said, okay, why, this is a product. Why you are maintaining five microservices? Why we not merge them together and ship one Docker container and run it on Fargate? We can replace everything at once. And this is better to replace one Fargate service than 5. And if there is one team, you shouldn't have more microservices than team members, right? So I would say it really depends why you need the microservices, or not why you need the microservices. Think about that. Why not to put everything? What happens? This is the question. What happens if you pick everything to a single Whitefly server and ship it to the cloud, right? So what problems do you expect? If there are no problems, just ship a monolith. But if you say, I cannot do this because we have 2 parts of the applications and one part ships on Monday and the other one on Friday. So, okay, now we are talking. So then we have 2 Whiteflies. Okay, this is what I'm doing. If there are no additional requirements, we have one Lambda, one microservice, one Docker image running on Fargate or ECS or ACI or app service or OpenShift. So this is what. Okay. So, but I would say then. But let's say you found, the reason why you would like to have 2 microservices. So in this particular case, I would use 2 Whiteflies Docker images, and they are not too heavy. They are perfectly fine. So it's absolutely okay. And then I wouldn't use the bootable jar Whitefly because it's an esoteric solution. And use Whitefly for several microservices. Or use one Whitefly for one war. And in this one war, have all microservices in there. And every microservice becomes a package, business component. So instead having, one microservice called screencasts, you have one package inside the war called screencasts. Why not that? So instead of, shipping multiple microservices, I will ship one microservice, which is well structured inside. Works perfectly. And yeah, and actually, and now we are in the point 4. So you actually answered your question by yourself. So use Quarkus to generate small image without using Whitefly. And yeah, and then we have one war with the packages. Then we say, okay, why we need Whitefly at all? Because there's one-to-one relation between the application server and the war. And in this particular case, you can say, okay, then I will pick Quarkus because Whitefly, I don't Whitefly anymore. Don't need Whitefly anymore. So I would use what I would recommend you. Merge all microservices, spend more time thinking about nice structure inside the application. You pick Quarkus and ship it as a Docker image, or go to my YouTube channel, AWS Lambda on premise. You say, okay, so then no AWS Lambda. Just go with plain Docker, and you have just one Docker image. You don't even need Kubernetes. Then you can run it just as a Docker image. Okay, now I had a podcast with Stewart Marks of this is the wrong Stewart Marks. No, it is funny. This is from Twitter, so this is the right Stewart Marks, but on GitHub, this Stewart Marks is a different Stewart Marks. And let's see, what is this about? I think this is the right. So back to the real. This is our Stewart Marks, and this is the Java committer, Java developer, and we had a chat on Airhacks FM, and we had a brief chat about tests, and I think, let's see, Stewart. This is a Dr. Deprecator. This was Stewart Marks. And we had a chat about testing. I think I think we recorded a subsequent episode with Dr. Deprecator or with Stewart Marks, and we had a chat about tests. And he wrote, found a reference to tautological tests, and I said, okay, I have to tell you about that, because the tautological test is exactly what I see in my projects. And it is not like this. So what is tautological tests? This is funny. Sum a plus b, and this says assert equal 5 plus 3 sum 5 3, right? So what they are doing, they are repeating, the entire business logic in the test. I don't see this. What I see is we have a JAX-RS resource, and the JAX-RS resource calls boundary. And of course, what the test does, it mocks out the boundary, and then ask and then calls the method, and after the methods ask is the mock called once? If is, the test passes. So and then I ask the developers, what are you actually testing here? Whether the mock, not even the mock is working, whether the assertions are working properly, and of course, if you do this, you get 100% code coverage. But every minor change in the business logic requires a change in the test, which is very expensive, and and this is tautological tests. So I didn't knew about the term, and you see, this is actually always a good idea to record a podcast with interesting people. So these were the tests. Let's see. I'm speaking a lot, and the chat goes crazy here. Coming from the PHP world, but loving the Java syntax features. So Christian, PHP, you could try Python for a while, then you will appreciate Java even more, I would say, right? So thank you, and the modern Java is really nice. So I really still enjoy writing Java code. So I don't know what's wrong with me, but right now we are working with Java 17. It's great. So Mr. Nerius Aimanevicius, perfectly pronounced for me, I hope. How to run Helidon on AWS Lambda. So you cannot run it currently, and they have an issue. GitHub. Helidon next. And as you can look, they have they had an issue here exactly about that. I found this recently. They would like to work on this, or maybe it is ready, but it was like, a few weeks ago. So they had issues here. This is the issue tracker from Helidon, and I thought search AWS. So you have to search that. So Helidon Lambda support, and I found this in this Helidon next. So this is actually this is from Aura, yeah. Okay, Oracle Cloud is true, but there was an issue. So we have asked the Dimitri, is Mr. Helidon, what's up with this issue, but right now it is not supported. But I found it in issue tracker a few weeks ago. But because I'm really interested, what's actually the progress? But how to run Helidon in AWS Lambda? You could actually do this because if you search for Helidon serverless container AWS, I think, Jersey, serverless Java container, and there is a Jersey container. So the code is there. The code was implemented a few years ago by AWS. So what they could just do, they can write a thin wrapper around Helidon and use and be executed as AWS Lambda. So this would work. So now I have my question in the gist. Yeah, of course, your question is going to be answered. So what is the best way to migrate the database table with Java? FlywayDB, I would say. Migrations, right? Back and forth. So Flyway is the more lightweight, and Liquibase is the more sophisticated way. I'm assuming you have SQL relational databases. If you have something like DynamoDB, there is not much to migrate. You will have to write code to migrate. Okay, now have you ever created a system using domain-driven design architecture? What do you think about that? So I'm actually currently almost going to do this. I'm working with a few air hackers actually in a project, and we have a central class which was anemic, and it gets richer and richer, and we have a nice mix of persistence and business logic inside. So and in one day, hopefully, it will be nice, a domain-driven class. So, and in the past, I did it a lot. Not a lot. I did it a few times. A lot means, a lot. It means I did it in a few projects, but there are far more projects with anemic domain objects than with rich domain objects, domain-driven design. And my observation was, if you have a graph or network-like domain. So this was one on transportation systems, and the other one was like signal processing system. And in both systems, like there was something traveled from node to node, and depending on the line between the edge between the nodes, there are different capabilities. So with Java and inheritance, and this was JPA back then. So we used persistent JPA objects, which with behavior it just worked nicely. Okay. Mr. Elman. I would just, shorten this. Can I write thin wrapper for Helidon from user space myself? Yes, you could. You could write it. So what you could do, if you would run, Helidon inside a Lambda, what you can do is you say, okay, this is the HTTP API gateway, what you can choose, or ELB, Elastic Load Balancer, and then they will send you a JSON object which gets automatically deserialized from Lambda for you. And this object is you will see the HTTP method, all the headers and stuff like that, and you will have to pick the data and invoke Helidon with the information, and then wait until Helidon processes the information. So boot Helidon, then get the data and return it back. Oh, wow. Now the chat is crazy, which is very good. So while using JPA, would you recommend using DB native as SQL or just and stick with JPQL? I would stick with JPQL because if you are running or writing SQL, you can accidentally introduce, how is this called? SQL injections, attacks, and with JPQL this is impossible because the SQL is processed and into prepared statements. So this is why I would use. The friend of the show, Andrei Kistes, is regarding the mapping. If you have entities and DTOs, you have some annotations on entities. You have JPA, and on DTO you have validation JSON for the REST service. So yeah, exactly. I think, Andrei, what you're asking here is if you have JPA entities, they have annotations, and would you expose the annotations to the outside world? And my answer is absolutely, because they are not exposed to the we cannot just expose them to the outside world. Why not? Because the days of Corba are over. So there is no more remote, communication. So what will happen is that these entities with annotations will get, to serialize to JSON usually. And if they are in JSON format, so there are no annotations. So the JSON is exactly the same whether you have annotations, JPA annotations or not. So I would, and if you really would like, to have a subset of the entities, take a look at Java records, for instance. Very good. So now back to the questions, because, for instance, Mr. Mahimatics is already, a little bit nervous. Okay, what's going on here? Where's my question? Okay, there's also a long friend of the show, Hans Pikemat. Okay, this is tautological tests, which are actually funny, but this is a good name because in the next code review, I perform some code reviews. I have a new term now. Your tests are tautological. So Hans Pikemat asked me, I have an application in Payara, and he creates UID, and he would like to lock the UID. The question is, can he just do something and lock the UID? So you can use CDI decorators, or you can use container request filters with JWT to achieve the same. So container request filters, you have access to the request. With CDI decorators, you have access to whatever you like. So what we did recently is we needed a token, token with additional information, so the token should be injectable everywhere. So this was the same idea. So we intercepted a call, stored the token in the request scoped bean, and then you can inject the request scope bean whenever you like. So this is the idea. And in your case, this is a UID, the order ID. The question is, the order ID is probably, in the request on somewhere. And you can absolutely do this, yeah. But then I need to create a decorator for every applicable interface. You could use a CDI extension and write a CDI extension, and actually wrote an article about that years ago. CDI extension. This was the article. I think it was on yeah, this is how old is the article here? 11 years, because now this is actually, I did this with interestingly in Java EE. Now we got microprovide config, so we could migrate this to microprovide config. So, but back to your, if you search for CDI extension, what you can do with CDI extensions, you are a long time listener to the show, so you of course all your projects are boundary control entity structured. So what you could do is you can create an CDI extension and say all boundaries are automatically, you get automatically an additional annotation and call it, what was it, order. Or order logger. So it means what you can do with CDI extensions, you can add additional metadata to classes. If you have boundary control entity structure, you can say all boundaries get additional annotation called order logger, order tracker. And then you can have CDI, not decorator, interceptor, which reacts to the annotation, and then there is no codeless interceptor then. I hope it's clear. Could work, but this is more, I don't like this approach because it's like magic. So I would rather annotate all the classes, I have to say, because then you exactly see what happens. But you can have some magic and some fun. If your project is boring, you say, okay, we store CRUD again to a database, then you can have some fun with extensions. I try to avoid them. So, Mr. Mahimatics, now back to you. Thank you for asking. I'm doing very well, so as you can see, and thank you. You are in chat, hopefully. Chat is nice. And what you found is really interesting. So you're asking me, okay, about some best when you're designing, or I will just read it. When designing a JWT API, do you have any specific best practices, recommendations like resource expansion, pagination, querying, filtering, and so forth? And standardization, convention over configuration. What you found is actually great. OData and Apache Olingo are actually great ideas. So what OData is, it comes actually from Microsoft, and is also heavily used in SAP. And what OData does, it standardizes the REST APIs. I actually like it. What I don't like at all are the naming conventions. They look like a little bit like C#, right? That's the problem. But if you have no idea what to do, I would pick OData, for instance, right? So having said that, I don't think it is really necessary to be very RESTful. So recently, the last year I had to work with AWS a lot, and they have, I don't know, 200 different services, and whatever you do is usually a REST call. But the REST APIs across these services are not always consistent. So sometimes there is no list resource, sometimes it's describe resources. So this is not always consistent, but if I see list, I already imagine I'll get several. Describe, I already know, okay, describe is sometimes a list. And create is usually a post, right? So you could be actually very effective, just be a little bit, if you just use HTTP methods properly and the status codes as well. So you don't have to be a Rastafarian. So I mean, if you exaggerate, your REST API is going to be very complicated. Also, you have to think, who will consume your API? If your API is consumed by a web client, let's say web components, so this is what I can talk about, because I also wrote some, web component apps which communicated with the backend. And then it is more like HTTP API client or microprofile REST client. You have a fetch API in JavaScript, and you can just call the backend. And this is just, and if you, the trick is, from my perspective, the REST API is good if you don't have to think a lot how to use it, right? So I think a very good API is actually the GitHub API. So if you take a look at the GitHub, let's see, GitHub REST API. Oh, they are complete different. It looks differently. So get users from defunct. I think defunct is probably the user defunct. And what do you get? Exactly, login defunct. So get users, this is get all users, but I don't like to have all users. I only would like to have one user, right? So and this is natural. Let's see what. So we will have. So I played with it, and this is very intuitive. So this is well done. You see here repos, for instance, this one repo and bootstrap, so you can navigate here. So I think if you would work, 5 minutes with the GitHub API, you can then just call something without thinking about it because it's very natural. It is always the same. And the consistency is also introduced by AWS, for instance. I think it's called Control API, right? They implemented Cloud Control API. So what they're doing right now, they're trying to standardize all the APIs. But obviously, it is working. So I mean, no one complains a lot that they cannot use the AWS APIs. They are just okay. They are not consistent across services, and it was fixed recently, for instance. Okay, so don't overthink the APIs, I would say. So but OData is you can steal lots of inspiration from OData and GitHub. Now, this is hopefully good. So I prepared that actually. So we had already the extensions and the GitHubs and the control API, serverless container. Let's see. And here. This is, if you take a look what happens. Now the Jakarta is working on Jakarta E10 core profile. And what their profile will comprise is Jakarta annotations, which are post-construct, for instance, and pre-destroy, CDI light. And CDI light means CDI without reflection, basically. And if you're interested, listen to the podcast, because I had a chat with Arian Times about that. And he said, okay, we had lots of fun, or we really enjoyed the conversation, because EJB started with code generation. So this is how EJB started. The very first EJB spec, the code was generated during deployment time, exactly what Quarkus does. And then reflection came with JDK 1.3, and everyone was excited. And now we are back full circle to this where it started. So Java context and dependency injection light 4. It means it won't use reflection, or it is going to simplify that the servers don't have to use, or runtimes don't have to use reflection. Then dependency injection just is add inject. Expression language is really hard. Why they need it here? So this is what but interceptors, JSON binding, JSON processing in RESTful web services. Now the interesting part is if you take a look at this. So Quarkus is going to be Jakarta E10 core profile compatible. Helidon is going to be Jakarta E compatible, core profile compatible. And Micronaut as well. So if you go to Micronaut, JAX-RS, they support JAX-RS. They support CDI. So they are working on that. So not completely, but at least it add inject. And they also support JSON-B. So we get another Jakarta E core profile runtime. So we get microprofile, Helidon, of course, all the application servers. And the interesting part is, where is my... Yeah. And actually, currently, I'm working on server lambdas, AWS lambdas, which implement all the APIs. So it means I'm running Jakarta E10 as a serverless AWS lambda right now, and which is interesting, right? So why it's also interesting, because now we have a microprofile right now, and this is like a subset of microprofile. So microprofile was a subset of how microprofile started. Now the very first microprofile was a subset of Jakarta E, and then grow bigger because we get metrics and so forth. And now Jakarta E has a core profile, which is smaller than microprofile. So I would call it nano profile and see what happens. This would be my marketing, not core, rather than nano. And then the microprofile guys would do maybe femto profile or something like this. And at the end of the day, what is left is just coffee baby, I would see. This was the the minimum what you can run. That is the first 4 bytes in every Java class. Okay, this was just random thoughts, but I just wanted to see what the progress, and then just thought about this and said, okay, actually, whatever I'm doing, I'm now back in the game. I know whatever I'm doing is Jakarta E10 actually. So this was reactive route Quarkus. This was one of the questions which I closed. Exactly. So we have it. So this was then a question from this was comment from YouTube. I don't like to open that right now, and it was the screencast with the name writing JSON logs with Quarkus on AWS Lambda with Java System Logger. And actually great news. You can use on Quarkus, on Lambda, just the system logger from Java lang system logger. So there is no external dependency, and Quarkus will just format this in JSON. But someone wants to learn about Jakarta Stack, and can you advise me for an application server? So so if you would like to start right now, I would start with Quarkus, because it's hugely popular and you get extensions for everything. So this is like it is. If you, I would say use this. If you say, okay, everyone uses Quarkus and I would like to use something else, something different, Micronaut, also great choice, or Helidon, great choice. And if you would like to use a full stack Jakarta E application server, my next choice would be Payara. So if you're really interested in application servers, then I would pick Payara, not because Payara is special, it's just because Payara, they have they are hiring the entire time, so they are growing like crazy, and they have an interesting project like Payara Cloud, which really interesting. What they are doing is the application server becomes a Kubernetes operator, and it starts and stops instances in the cloud. So this is Payara Cloud. So and another application server is OpenLiberty. Whitefly is great. The problem is Quarkus, OpenLiberty, and Whitefly are more or less one company called IBM. And I would say Quarkus is hugely popular. And if you take a look of OpenLiberty, is a great application server. It's also very lightweight. But I would say Quarkus is more popular than OpenLiberty. And why popularity matters? Because if you search for problems or whatever, then search for problems, for answers to your problems or for fixes, then you will find them more easily. And what I do in my projects is I use Quarkus, but I still only stick with microprofile, and it works great. So for me, I use Quarkus as a great optimization platform, but I still use microprofile. Okay, I hope answered. And this is actually really nice. So Carlos Mentos, he pinged me on Twitter, and what he listened to a podcast with Chatay Civici. And that's the deal. So I had a podcast twice with him, and Chatay said, if I invite him the third time, he will, or let's say, this was not exactly right. What he said is, Chatay said, this is the inventor or creator of prime faces. What Chatay said is, before he will have to release web components from prime faces before I invite him, to the next Airhacks FM episode. So my response was, then let's do it next week. But but back to Mr. Carlos Mantos, is what Carlos did. He created a GitHub repository, a collection of single file, zero dependency, self-contained web components. So I had no time to look at his components, but this is what I really like. So this idea, I never got the why we have to transpile sometimes 5 times in order to use it in a web. I mean, usually, when I started with, in web, I had, a reference to something and I could just use it. And now it is not usable. So you have to run, an entire tool chain locally in order, to have a visual component, which is really not necessary. And this is also recognized by Mr. NewK5. Yes, by NewK5. So what you should all do, at least start the repo from him and take a look, and maybe you can contribute something to him. And yeah, he already describes. So this is actually what I really like in his approach. And I don't know how large his. Wow, let's see, 15 days. So something happens already. So take a look on, for instance, date picker. Okay. He creates the components. This is actually pretty cool, I would say. So I would say you should at least give him a star, if not contribute something, okay? Because this is actually really great, and it just say, okay, let's start this. We will just do this. Cool idea. Okay. Now, Mr. Joined this month, Ilberry51. The question is, he asked basically, we have RESTEasy, RESTEasy Reactive, RESTEasy Routes, and we have Loom, and we have Java, and what's the deal? So, of course, this was already discussed in the EHXFM podcast with the creator of Reactive, EHXFM. If you search for Reactive, with Daniel, not Daniel. Daniel was also very reactive back then, but they Mutiny. This was the name, Mutiny. Exactly. And the Clément Escoffier is actually the creator of Mutiny, which is the reactive everything on Quarkus. And it was nice chat with him. And I will actually also invite him back to EHXFM. And so the gist was that, or back to the question. So you have to listen to the episode. But to answer your question here, is what you're asking is, what the deal, right? So we have a lots of reactive stuff. So my perspective is the following. I don't care what Quarkus does internally. So whether they use reactive or not, I don't care. They have to be just efficient, and no, I don't care what they are doing internally. So, and there are some things which are reactive, and there are some things which are not reactive. For instance, Kafka is very reactive. There is a stream, of messages just, flowing from somewhere, and I can react to these messages and do something with them. So for that, I always use Kafka Streams, which is a very reactive framework, because this is very natural. I would say, if you invent arrive, combine it with different event, and you are done. So this is, reactive. JWT for me is not reactive at all. It's a request and response. But you can still use reactive programming to make your system more scalable. And what I understand is there are projects in Quarkus where they are not business project what I'm usually spend my time. Rather than, if you build a load balancer, for instance, you have to use reactive programming because you have one instance running all the time, and you get 1,000 of requests in parallel, and then you cannot just open or start 1,000 threads. So what this reactive programming does, it tries to reduce the amount of threads and increase the parallel behavior, right? The parallelism of the application. Now, Project Loom could fix that, because what Project Loom, it tries to achieve the same without introducing new APIs or a lot of new APIs. So I'm really looking forward to Project Loom, and I would use Mutiny or reactive programming or reactive routes or whatever only when I would build like orchestrators where I have to call 5 different microservices in a chain, because then I can express the the asynchronous behavior more easily or with less code. And before I would do this, my first choice would be to use completable future, actually, because ships with JDK. If you have 3 microservices, I don't need a reactive framework. So I think we are thinking similar. And I get this question a lot, so I do a lot of Quarkus, and everyone asks me, no, should we use the reactive JWT? I never use that. And Quarkus runs fine and is fast enough in my projects without any reactive programming on my side. But I know that internally, Quarkus uses reactive stuff, but I don't care. Exactly the same, like, for years, I really used Glassfish a lot, and Glassfish used internally OSGI, but I didn't like the OSGI, and I never used OSGI in Glassfish. I just used Java E. And whether Glassfish used OSGI internally or not, I really didn't care. Exactly. So, one more question. Now, when using Quarkus to build serverless Lambda functions on AWS, the question is, should we use JWM or GraalVM? So, take a look at the recent YouTube screencast on my channel. Yeah, you are already on my channel. I forgot, actually, it is also streamed on YouTube right now. Yeah, the screencast before this one. And you will see that the invocation of a full stack Quarkus, a full stack means entire microprofile, one injection and microprofile config takes 5 milliseconds. So the shortest billable, how to call it, unit, is 1 millisecond. And we have 5 milliseconds with logging, with everything. With everything means JAX-RS, JSON object, dependency injection, and so forth. 1 millisecond, you cannot be faster than 1 millisecond, and we have 5 with full stack microprofile. So with GraalVM, I don't expect to be faster. What is going to be faster for sure is the cold start. So the cold start happens usually the very first time, and then depends how often you call the Lambda function. If you call the Lambda function every few minutes, usually you won't see any cold start. If you call the Lambda once an hour, then you will see a cold start. So but the cold start has two parts. This is the Java cold start and the Lambda cold start. Even if you reduce, the Lambda cold start to 0, I suspect that the Lambda cold start will be still, 400, 500 milliseconds, stuff like that. So I mean, you won't be built for that, but the Lambda still needs, to start the entire execution runtime. So therefore, I'm not using native images. I'm just using the Corretto 11 image right now on Lambda, and it is, why not? It is also better from various perspectives, because the Lambda 11, Corretto 11 is maintained by AWS. This is the OpenJDK version, actually, so you can download and run it even. Corretto, they have even 18, I think, already. Yeah. And they have even for ARM downloads page. And on Lambda, you get exactly the same OpenJDK and Amazon patches is for me. So I don't like, to ship my own runtime with GraalVM because I'm the responsible then for patching or whatever. And the Lambda runtime is patched by Amazon. Okay. So this was this. Then you can reduce the initial cold start, but the subsequent execution, it is not given that the GraalVM or the native image is going to execute faster than the JVM. It could even be that the JVM executes 10% faster than the Corretto. And if you're interested, you can go to our AXFM podcast and listen to the interview with Thomas Wöttinger of GraalVM. We had exactly the chat. I said, okay, they try, with the native image to be even better than the JVM, but currently the JVM is still faster. And and we are already crazy fast. And even let's say we are not executing 5 milliseconds rather than 4 milliseconds. I mean, is it really worth? This is the question, right? Yeah. So this was the discussion. And so the last thing is the most important one, I think. What you will save with native image is memory, RAM, because the native image you will probably run on 10 megs, and the JVM takes, well, I don't know, 60 megs, let's say. But it's pointless. On Lambda, you will have to buy CPU, more CPU with more memory. So what we are usually doing in production is we are running Lambdas. The cheapest configuration on Java is, my observation is roughly 1 to 2 gigs of RAM, because you get then a half to one virtual CPU. If you are lower than a half a CPU, the execution time increases because the CPU, there is no more CPU, no more power, right? And so it's not like, you know, we have more RAM than we can actually use on AWS Lambda. Now, Billy LGTM, ask me, differences between Quarkus and Micronaut. Of course, this topic was discussed on the XFM podcast with Graham Roche. So with what's really nice is both achieved the same, but in completely differently. So Quarkus have extension and build time extensions, which and these build time extensions optimize bytecode. And Micronaut doesn't have any build time extensions. Build time extensions, what Micronaut is doing, it generates bytecode from annotations, basically. Annotation processor. So, it can be that Quarkus is not full reflection free, because no one, I mean, you can build an extension with reflection, and then when the extension registers the classes for reflection, and the GraalVM compiles the classes, then this is a perfect Quarkus extension. So whether Quarkus is fully reflection free, I don't care, I have to say. Why not? Because my ultimate test is running a full stack microprofile on AWS Lambda, and it shuts down, starts the Lambda in 5 milliseconds. So I would say it is faster than Node.js, faster than Python. Whether Quarkus uses in few cases reflection or not doesn't matter. Fact is, that Micronaut from the idea is great. I mean, because this is really crazy stuff what you can do with Quarkus or Micronaut, with both. Because if you think about this, you get with Micronaut and Quarkus reflection at build time. Because what Micronaut, for instance, is doing, if they build the persistence at build time, they can connect to database, fetch the metadata, and see whether the entities are correctly mapped to a table. Quarkus does the same with CDI. I don't know whether you noticed, but if you have, if the injection, let's say you have one interface, two implementation, then you try to inject, the interface. So you get at build time an error because the Quarkus already fails with bytecode generation. So, okay. And also, Quarkus docs prefer package private field injection. I also prefer the package private field injection. If you watch my code for years, I was too lazy to use the private, and now Quarkus does the same for different reasons. And I really like the package private approach. Why? Because it's easier to test. Yeah. So I just liked, and actually in my current project. I always, if IDE sometimes suggests, private, I always delete the private. Is pointless because my unit tests are in the same package as the class. So I used to know the package private for years. Let's see. My oldest, simplest possible EJB Adam Bean. Let's see. Oh. This is back then. Yeah, okay, but this was 14 years ago, so I didn't use beta. So back then I used still, private, but in one point of time I said, okay, this private is stupid, and just left, the private and just used everywhere the package private for years. Would be interesting when I started with it, and but not Quarkus. This was way before Quarkus. Okay. I think we answered this one. You should have shorter questions because it's really hard to answer everything properly, right? So, and by the way, okay, this is the last one. Let's see what the chat does. You are sleeping here. So, Mr. C. I usually find pagination resource expansion a common task among any API consumer, mainly Android devs. Sometimes they suggest GraphQL, but I find it makes the server code more complex. It makes the code complex. There is a microprofile GraphQL, by the way, and pagination. I will have to implement next week, I think, pagination. But yeah. Ah, we get some spam as well. The first time. Yeah. Brett Tucker from Utah or Arizona. I always confuse both. But Brett, hello. So now this is Mr. Nerigius. This is from the chat. Now I will try to perfectly pronounce the name, and Nerigius is already perfect, I guess. But the last name is Aymanavicius. This is sorry, it's completely wrong. But if we one time if you meet me, I will learn it. So I have Struts 1 application. What I want to migrate to more modern framework. I wouldn't do this because everything server-side rendering, and Strut is simple. I would even wait with Struts 5 years, and then we are talking. Then you have then we can sell Struts as an we have to rename it. Let's call it not Struts rather than how to call it, reactive Strutlets or something. Reactive Strutlets. This would be actually interesting name. And then remove all the reflection. There is some reflection in Struts. And then make it GraalVM compatible, and you would get, the single page applications with server-side rendering. So one option is Struts 2. Now, how would you execute such migration? It's hard, right? I mean, I don't know how your application looks like, but back to Struts. Of course, there is an episode with the creator of Struts 2. Struts 2. What I wanted to show you is the following. This is the Struts 2 project, and I'm really curious, contributors. We have to wait until the data is crunched. Let's see. Utah, okay. And of course, always ever see Brett, I always remember he was also in Munich from Utah. And was it direct flight, Brett, back then? This was interesting. And then Brett tried to replicate, of course, glowing wine in Utah and sent me some pictures, which looked interesting. What I remember, it was a huge bucket of glowing wine. Let's see. Okay, Lucas Lennart, this is the guy, and can see how active Struts 2 actually is. So this is 2020, so still something happens, right? So I would say migrating to Struts 2 is not as crazy. And I think you have, a complex application. What I will do, this is actually, where is, here. Lucas Lennart is really a nice guy, and think he's even consultant. So this is his page. Ping Lucas and ask him whether it is appropriate. So greetings from me, say it was nice podcast, and he looks really nice because I saw them in podcast. This is like he sees like a Terminator, but usually a nice guy. And so you can ping him and ask him whether it is appropriate, to migrate from Struts 1 to Struts 2. He's the committer which spends a lot of time with Struts 2, and you can of course AirHexFM. This is Struts. Oh man. Exactly. This is the episode number 125 with Lucas Leonard, and we had exactly the episode, what he does, and Struts to CDI dependency injection, whatever. So take a look on this. So, but let's forget Struts 1. What I will do, I will just take a look at the code and say, okay, if the entire code is in the GSPs, it's really hard to migrate. But if the code, you say, okay, the GSPs are more like templates and the actions are just, the binding logic between the JSPs and the what was the model, then it might work. Then you can migrate to somewhere else. Okay. Is there a reason to migrate to microprofile application? You cannot migrate Struts 1 to microprofile. I mean, what you could do, of course, the actions should not contain any business logic in Struts 1. What you could do, you could use CDI and inject, the business logic. Why you should do such a thing? Because I really think that the separation of business logic and presentation logic is beneficial, because you can focus on just implement the business logic, write unit tests, and the presentation logic usually is highly depending on the view, and it changes more often than the backend. And okay, but if you have the problem with Struts is it is server-centric framework. You are referring here to SPAs, which is the opposite. Single-page applications usually you would implement differently. I would pick web components and take a look at what the developer new 5K creates, and web components in the front end which talk via REST with the backend. So there is nothing left for Struts in the backend. Then you can use microprofile application and let's say Quarkus, for instance. So if you're referring to microprofile, Quarkus or Helidon. Is there any Java APIs that would help for easy maintenance or cheap upgrades to such system? Cheap upgrades, that's the deal. So you are here, I think, in the right location. If you use microprofile and Jakarta E APIs, there's actually no upgrade. If you take a look, on the oldest entries of my blog, the 2008 EJB, it could be upgraded to microprofile just by replacing at EJB with at inject, and it will run. And if you have a newer, let's say, let's see whether I did something with Java 6. Oh, this is an heretical topic. 12 years old, but there is no source code. Yeah, this is what you already saw. But this code is 11 years old, and this would work. So let's say I would really have, to migrate this to Quarkus. So this remove private, then application scoped and startup. This would be the change. So minimal changes, I would say. And because they are EJBs, this is startup, and these EJBs are not available on Quarkus. But this will still run, the 11 years old code will run without any modifications on all the application servers I know. So OpenLiberty, Whitefly, Payara, so there are no modifications required. And by the way, Exactly. Okay, this is fun. What you see, I'm very young right now, but then I was even younger. It was like 2000 and I wrote it somewhere 2012. And I said back then, I wrote on stage, Java a future is now, but is not evenly distributed yet. And I was invited last year to the same conference, or 2 years ago, 2020. And I remembered, okay, I was already on JDD conference and found the old code. And during this talk, I migrated the code to the recent Whitefly without almost no modifications. So I would say how to keep your code maintainable is, by the way, I got also last week a request from a client regarding front end, and they told me, okay, you helped us, a few years ago with Jakarta, it still runs. There is nothing to do. So I would say regarding maintainability, I would advise, to stick with no microprofile or Jakarta standards, because then you can swap the runtimes. This is, okay. I think we covered a lot, and the latest episode was with Iron Times, because it is an issue in the 94th episode of Airhacks TV, where I said, okay, Payara is the way to go and Glassfish is almost dead, and Aryan told me, okay, this is not true. And I interviewed Aryan why he contributes to Glassfish. And this was the episode. And Glassfish is actually very vibrant right now. Okay. Also interesting. Last week there was an AWS workshop, which was well attended. It was lots of fun. And I got lots of questions regarding persistence. So I got the idea. I said, okay, then let's do just a workshop in December just about persistence. And there will be serverless persistence for serverless Java on AWS, because we'll discuss, how to invoke a database from a Lambda, for instance. And by the way, and so there's another workshop, almost forgot about that, is in May, where I prepare, already patterns or approaches on AWS, like, Fargate with keys and database, or VPC with VPN and connection, right? Or I don't know, like common patterns, which I get asked a lot, and then I will deploy it and explain what happens behind the scenes. Because all other workshops, I created everything from scratch, and there's often not enough time in one day workshop. Okay, so Micronaut, great. Reactive routes, okay, I just how they look like. They look a little bit different. And this is wanted to show you. This was from Quarkus, also explained, or discussed. I think it was a great long show. Let's see what the chat says. Okay. Thank you all for watching. And this time was, I don't know, was very busy. Chat was great. So even with some hot questions or suggestions, I guess. Yeah. See you in May already. So time flies. And in May, maybe on Airhacks live workshops on my podcast. And otherwise, then, file your questions to the gist, and see you next month. Bye.